Today I want to talk about buying a business or starting a business. 3 different case studies, 3 different scenarios. I have a couple of clients there at the moment, and it just struck me over the last fortnight or so that each of them is either buying a business or starting up a business, and each of the scenarios is slightly different and does require a bit of thought from a legal perspective and from perhaps a business perspective. A lot of people go into businesses in a pretty naive way without doing the necessary checks and without getting legal advice and tax advice and accounting advice and so on. Sometimes accounting advice is not necessary, sometimes tax advice won't be necessary, but legal advice is definitely necessary. And I'm going to tell you about 3 different scenarios here, and you'll see yourself that some experience in the whole area of business, in the whole area of starting up a business and taking on premises and so on, would be very, very useful. The first scenario is the purchase of a beauty business. So this is a business that's based on the high street or on a main street. It's a beauty business, it's a business in the beauty industry, and the person who's buying it is looking for advice and so on. First thing I'd say to them is that obviously there must be a lease if it's a retail premises, and there is a retail premises. So the key thing to look at in the first instance is the lease itself and see exactly what it provides for, see what the term of the lease is, see whether a deed of renunciation was signed at the outset in relation to the lease, and see how long the lease has to run to its term end, as it were. So, I mean, it is conceivable that you could buy a business and the underlying lease for that particular business premises was 4 years and 9 months, and there's 2 years gone, and therefore after another 2 years and 9 months you will be out, you'll be thrown out of the business, and you'll be thrown out of the premises rather, and your business will be in difficulty. So the question of the lease is the first thing to look at in relation to the beauty business, the beauty industry business that we're looking at. Secondly, we need to consider the landlord's consent. The landlord may be very, very happy with the existing tenant and may have had no difficulties whatsoever down through the years with the existing tenant in relation to the likes of rent, service charges, rates, all that stuff. Why would the landlord therefore freely and willingly give his or her consent to a new person going in there, when the landlord knows what they have already, knows that the person that was in the place already has been a very good tenant and has had no difficulty? That landlord is going to need to be satisfied about the new tenant, the new person going in. So the landlord's consent will be required. Another factor to consider is, in the beauty industry and in many industries, the personal service, the idea of personal service, personal relationship is very, very important. When my client buys this business, if they buy this business, will the person, the vendor of the business, be taking clients, their clients, with them? In other words, will they then decide, for example, to operate A, from some other retail unit, or B, perhaps from home? And will that have a significant impact on the business that my client thinks they're buying? So there are some factors you need to consider in relation to that particular scenario, scenario 1, the buying of business in the beauty industry with a retail premises. The second one is to do with childcare and that industry. In this industry there is slightly different factors to consider. There is the statutory obligations in relation to the whole childcare sector and the regulations impacting on the childcare sector. And then obviously if it's an existing business, then you need to consider how many the various financial factors feeding into that business, how many children attend, how often they attend, what the fee income is, then the whole question of staff, the question of the transfer of undertakings, and you as the purchaser of such a business then taking on by way of a transfer of undertaking, a lot of staff with existing rights and existing entitlements and existing service and contracts transferring over to you. So that's another aspect to the business. In other words, they may be looking at a premises as well, but they may also be looking at a significant enough workforce. And obviously they're looking at an existing turnover, existing fee income and so on. And then there is the added complication of the statutory involvement or the satisfying of the statutory bodies in relation to childcare and the taking over of a childcare business by a new person. So that's the second scenario, second business. The third is not so much a business as a person who is in the retail game, is very familiar with it and is starting a new business in a premises. It's only a retail premises or is a retail premises. All he's buying is a lease. He's not buying an existing business, not buying an existing business with a goodwill or with a turnover or with an income, but is simply taking on perhaps the lease of a premises. Again, what's important here then would be that the idea that whatever he's going to put into that premises is going to work in the particular location, and nobody can be certain. But B, more importantly, if he's taking on a lease, how long is the lease for? What's the rent? How often is there annual or rent reviews, normally every 5 years? How long is the lease? That's absolutely critical. And is the person, my client, taking on the lease, being asked to sign a deed of renunciation? If they are announcing the right to a new lease at the end of the existing lease. So let's say the existing lease is 2 years, let's say it's 4 years, let's say it's 10 years. At the end of that period, they may or may not be entitled to a new lease pursuant to legislation. However, if they sign a deed of renunciation, then they are not entitled to a new lease because they are foregoing or giving up their entitlement to a new lease pursuant to the legislation. So there's three different scenarios, three different businesses, different industries, and different considerations for an advisor and for the purchaser of each of the businesses to consider. And you'll see that even though there is some common ground, some commonality across the three businesses, there's also some fairly subtle nuances which will be unique and specific to the business itself. I hope you enjoy this, and I would appreciate if you're watching it on YouTube to give the thumbs up down below, and if you are listening to it on a podcast, then I'd appreciate if you left a review for the podcast. Thanks a lot.